My hope is built on nothing less than Jesus' blood and righteousness. I dare not trust the sweetest frame, but
I'm amazed at how much attention a little old brick country church out in the middle of nowhere can get.
Another violation ticket issued to a tiny church fighting for freedom in Canada.
Last Sunday, 4 police vehicles.
This here, this morning, received for practicing my faith.
The crime, holding what they are calling an essential Sunday service.
In the past several weeks, we have seen pastors and faith leaders fined and charged at an unprecedented rate. I personally have received both a court summons and a fine. Why? For exercising my right of peaceful assembly with a small group of believers. Officers have entered our church building without permission. Also, at the same time, disrupting the church service, all in direct contravention of Section 176 of the Canadian Criminal Code.
How can we keep our churches open amidst this pandemic? What can we do?
The church is the people. That's why they're here. This is the church. Do you understand? Sir, do you understand? You're charging all these people.
A number of churches across the country are speaking up, challenging government health orders that insist they remain closed.
Which is the church, sir? Point to the church.
The building?
No, sir. No, sir. No, sir. That's where you're mistaken. That's where you're mistaken. You're fighting against God. The people, this is the church.
When you touch the church, you touch the apple of God's eye. He has commanded us to assemble.
Words of comfort during a time of crisis and peaceful pushback against government overreach. Today on The Rendezvous, we're going to meet Pastor Thomas Tovstiga.
The corrupt and dishonest conduct by this government justifies peaceful yet determined civil disobedience.
Canadian born and raised in and around Tillsonburg, Ontario, Pastor Thomas, along with his wife and child, relocated to the Leamington area in 2016. He purchased this small community church in Wheatley, now home to the southernmost Church of God Fellowship in Canada.
We need real men, not afraid to lift their voice, not afraid to call things out for what they are.
Having been privately educated, his father's a doctor and his mother a teacher.
We have always gathered, and we will keep on gathering.
And as a true north trumpet of the gospel, Pastor Thomas proclaims that the church has always been a voice in the wilderness.
Even when there was no other voice, and especially in times of oppression and injustices and times of crisis, that voice was expected to be coming from the church. And I feel like that's where we are today. That's where we are, and that is my desire as a pastor, to be that voice.
Now, there are peaceful protests taking place across the world, and they are being met with some resistance. I've heard you speak. You seem to bring passion to your speeches, but at the same time, sort of, a defiance against authority.
We're not questioning their narrative anymore. We are actively resisting it.
This is discrimination, it's kidnapping and forcible confinement.
Explain to us a little bit about why it's important to resist some of the tactics and maybe the overreach when it comes to infringing on people's rights here in Canada.
Looking over the history of Christianity, we see that, generally speaking, we see that Christians have been peaceful, obedient citizens, and that's who we are. We are not looking for conflict. We're not even desirous of conflict. However, we as Christians, I as a Christian, and we as the church feel that we have a God who deserves our first allegiance, and whose laws we must firstly obey and respect. If it should come to the place, and we feel that in some instances it has, where the laws of the land conflict with our belief and our faith, we feel that we have no choice but to stand on what we believe and on what our conscience tells us and what it demands of us, and take that stand.
We will always resist tyranny. And as it has been said, all tyranny needs to gain a foothold is for people of good conscience to remain silent.
Aside from our faith and our conscience, we have a charter as Canadians that gives us that right, that constitutional charter right to protest, to disagree, to make our voice of dissent heard. And in times like this, you were mentioning the protests, when we see that that voice is really being disrespected and disregarded by the government, that's reason for concern.
We read all these scriptures to show you one thing.
Yes, sir.
That whenever the governments of this world are fearful of losing their power, there's one thing they turn to, there's one thing they go to, there's one tactic they use, and that is oppress the people more.
You're able to get up in front of people and, articulate words, thoughts, phrases, and sometimes you make reference to the Bible too. So how are you trying to connect with them?
We have a mandate, and that is to show God's love and to show His care. He's our Creator, and regardless of everyone's personal belief or religion or persuasion, but in the end, we all need spiritual support. We're not just flesh and blood. We have a spirit, right? We have emotions. We have feelings. We're spiritual beings, and even for non-Christians or whatever religion or non-religion it may be, but everyone needs to have their spiritual man taken care of, and that's why we strive to bring in the Bible and the comforting words that are in it that actually serve as a guide for someone's life, especially in a crisis such as this.
Our babies still need to be kissed and cuddled. Our children still need playmates. Our teenagers still need that arm around them, and Grandma still needs our hugs. If you take these things away from humans, you take life itself away.
I've always, even from my childhood, had a desire to be a leader. And of course, not looking ahead this far, and none of us could have predicted that we would be in such times as we are today. But I've always had that desire to be a leader, to do good, to I'm not saying I was always good, but to do something where people could look on and find comfort, find strength, find hope, and have someone to follow. I felt a call to the ministry, to preaching and serving that way from very young. I actually delivered my first little sermon when I was 18. And have been going on from there. It's been a wonderful journey. It's been a wonderful road of learning and of good times, hard times, and all of that. But from very young on, I felt the need to lead, and that's what I'm endeavoring to do today.
People say, Pastor, what about Romans chapter 13? Don't we need to obey the government? Let me tell you something. When a civil government rightly administers the law according to the Constitution and the freedoms given to us by God, it is well that we obey. But when a ruler corrupts the law and attempts to enslave the people contrary to the Constitution, the agreement between him and the people is dissolved.
Now, for the argument that some people will present saying, we should all do our part to, maintain social distancing, not go to what's being labeled as gatherings, trying not to spread what's being called a virus.
Very important point there, James, and I'm going to say that we are very sensitive to things that go around, viruses that go around. And it's not just, COVID-19. It's other viruses that can be harmful and in some cases deadly. However, we as human beings we weren't born in hazmat suits. We were created.
We have become germaphobes, though.
Yes, in many cases. But we were made to have human contact. We were made from our childhood on. Children that don't get contact, human contact, whether that be from their parents, grandparents, extended family, church family, sports teams, all of that interaction, so exceedingly vital for a child's development, for a teenager's development, and even for us as adults. We really need it as human beings. We are very careful. I'm very careful. If someone's not feeling well, absolutely, they need to self-isolate. But can we just change the normalcy of what it means, or not just normalcy, but the necessity that humans have to be together? Do we have to be careful? Yes. Have we been careful? Absolutely. We are sensitive that way, like I said. But the long-term effects of being separate, of not having social interaction, of not seeing each other face to face, you can't survive mentally, socially, emotionally looking at a screen. You can't survive online. We aren't online FaceTiming creatures. That's not us naturally.
We are the one human family, all part of one race, the human race.
Going back to a year ago, or almost a year ago now, before all this came upon us, they started off and we all heard 2 weeks to flatten the curve. Let's do this. There's this novel virus. Let's all band together. We're all in this together.
Back then it seemed pretty reasonable.
Exactly. Yeah. And what did we do? We did it. We obeyed. Gladly. Not that we gladly, stopped having church services, but gladly in the sense of, yes, this is new. This is uncharted. These are uncharted waters. So immediately we stopped having church services, and it was no problem. We thought, we'll do whatever it takes, 2 weeks, and what we're finding now is that it's about a year, and we know that it can't go on forever. So making that decision to gather as the church and to be together as we really need to be is not just something off the cuff or something that we haven't considered. We've weighed it out. But when we look at James, both sides, and we weigh it out, and we see a virus, yes. And yes, I sorrow for everyone that has lost their life from that virus or others. But when we look at the other side and we see all the depression, real depression, we see suicides, not being with family, not being with friends. We have children, on the screen 8 hours a day. A child can't live that way. We have children afraid to go to the playgrounds, afraid now in the winter to the ice rinks. None of that has been modeled. We never get a modeling from the provincial government, from our federal governments. We never get the modeling that predicts how many suicides are going to happen. We never get the modeling that predicts how many children are going to be abused, how much domestic violence is going to happen. So we have to start a very different conversation than what we've been hearing from our politicians and from the mainstream media. because we are in a mental health crisis.
In early December 2020, Sick Kids Hospital released preliminary findings of its own study. The study examines how the spring lockdown affected the mental health and well-being of children and families. Listen, according to preliminary findings, during the spring lockdown, 70% of children and youth reported worse mental health. 70%. Greater stress from social isolation was the most significant risk factor for worse mental health. In January 25th, 2021, news release, the Pediatricians Alliance of Ontario expressed strong support for reopening of schools as soon as possible. The Pediatricians Alliance wrote that, quote, school closures are having a major and immediate effect on the emotional functioning and physical health of children and families. Pediatricians are seeing a sharp increase in suicidal attempts, depression, anxiety, substance abuse, overdoses, eating disorders, obesity, and late presentation of a host of medical conditions in patients.
Yes, we have to be careful with the virus. We have to be careful, when we're not feeling well and all of that. But the fact is that the vast majority of those that have passed away due to the virus or with the virus are elderly people. And again, my heart goes out to them and to their families. But closing schools, almost indefinitely it seems, making the livelihoods of thousands be totally ruined, the cure is worse than the disease.
In sincerity, I ask our officers this question. Are you in fact determined to be on the wrong side of history? What is your job worth once your conscience has been violated? Does the praise of your supervisor so greatly outweigh the reprimands of your own spirit?
Are you thinking about the oath that you have sworn? You said you would protect the Constitution, and you said you would protect the When will you do that?
That's right.
When will you do that? Officer, please join us. When will you do that?
Take the piece of paper.
The police officer standing there administering these documents, they must have a conscience.
My message to our governments, my message to our mayors, premier, politicians, number one, they must recognize that the church is absolutely and completely essential. That's where we got off track. And it's because of the complacency of the churches. It's really the lukewarmness, the complacency of churches all over Canada, all over the world, in fact, that have allowed politicians, our lawmakers, our governments, now in a crisis, to essentially say that God is not essential. To just say, no, churches aren't essential. Yes, the liquor stores, no problem, 50% capacity, in-person service.
Grocery stores.
Walmart, Costco, no problem. I was at Costco the other day. There was probably a lineup of about 100 people.
Did you apologize to God for being at Costco?
We want them to be open. We want them to be open. I want all the businesses to be open. That's not what we're getting at. What we're getting at is church is just as and more essential.
I have no animosity towards the police. I have no animosity towards anybody. We love all people, but just be just and include me. Include the pastors. Include those who are dealing with the community from day to day, from hour to hour.
Why aren't pastors considered publicly as essential workers? I am. I'm an essential worker. I deal with the community. I work, I support, I'm there, I pray with people. We minister to all sorts of needy people. That's my message, is church must be essential.
If there are any police officers out there that are watching this, and you have made the giant leap of faith to turn your back on something that perhaps doesn't align with your moral code, and you have quit your job as a police officer, we'd love to speak to you. So the email to get hold of us here on Rendezvous is on your screen right now. But do you feel that this time that we're in is pushing people, or perhaps bringing people back to God and back to the church? Because we live in a society now where the numbers of church attendance has been dropping.
Yes, the church has always had the opportunity to benefit from a crisis, as far as its growth, as far as its vitality, even in times of past persecutions, where persecution was a matter of life and death. Those were times when the church really prospered in its character, in its inner purity. And I believe that before us, even in the midst of the darkness and the struggle and the whole crisis that we're in, I believe that before us as the church lies an opportunity. While others are getting rich, and the top 1% of the rich are becoming richer, and the world, many parts of the world are being plunged into more and more poverty due to the lockdowns. The church has a unique opportunity, if we take it, to be that lighthouse across a stormy sea, to be that clarion voice, that call that gives hope, that inspires faith. Because when everything's being taken away from you, when you can't even be with family, when you've gone bankrupt, when you're wondering what tomorrow will hold, it's just natural to reach out to a higher power, to reach out in prayer, in faith, to a higher power, a God that really understands who we are and what's going on. And I believe that if the church doesn't stand up, if the church doesn't use this opportunity to show people light and hope in the midst of darkness, we failed. And that's why we're doing what we're doing.
How can someone find God? Does it just happen one day, or do you? Is it a feeling within, or is it just a sort of a sense of how you carry yourself among people?
God is real, and Scripture tells us that God is a spirit, and if we seek Him, He has promised to reveal Himself to us. And that's what I would encourage all our viewers, even today. If you're struggling, if you're at the end of your rope, if you're in a hopeless situation, reach out in prayer. We can talk to God. We can talk to Him as our Creator, as the supreme being that loves us.
This is meant to be a life of beauty.
Yes.
Like a garden.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. And it's really, all of what man has done over millennia that has brought us to where we are. Even the sicknesses, the viruses, for instance, has been a result of man not living in God's will, and God wants us to come back to Him, and I believe it's a call for Canada, for the world, to come back to Him, to seek Him, because there's strength and there's hope in Him.
Who largely makes up your congregation? I see you guys dressed up in the sort of like the suits, the black. Some people might say you're like Mennonites or something, but I don't think that's what you are, right?
No, we're not Mennonites.
No.
We're Church of God.
Church of God.
And we're Bible-believing Christians. We believe the Holy Scriptures to be our guide. We believe in salvation from sin and from guilt. We believe that God can make you a new creature, as the Scripture brings out, through faith in Him, through faith in His blood. And we're passionate about who we are. Yeah. We're not just religious.
So what's the difference between sort of the Mennonites and because there are different groups across Ontario.
For sure.
In fact, coming through Stratford and coming the scenic route towards London, Ontario, you see some of these communities. Explain who makes up this area.
Yes, absolutely. So there are definitely a lot of groups with Mennonite background. There's the Amish, those who are plain people and dress with certain dress codes and so on.
And they all go to church on Sunday, right?
I hope they do now.
Most of them. I hope they do now.
Yes, right. That is correct though. But what this world needs to see, what our communities needs to see is not religion, not more religion. They need to see a passionate, fiery, on fire, dedicated, devoted people that are ready to stand up no matter what, if it's popular or not, if it's socially acceptable or not, politically correct or not. We need passionate service to God and to our community, and that's what we're here for.
Worshippers of the Lord, the King of Kings,
Yes, I've had the great privilege and honor of traveling some in the country. We had the privilege of being in Alberta and speaking to different ones there, Toronto as well, and we just feel like it is time to be that voice.
What kind of feedback do you get from not only people in the general public, but from your peers in the church?
Mm-hmm. A lot of support, and I believe we're actually seeing more and more people, generally speaking, people that are recognizing the great need to have a different conversation concerning what's happening, and people that are actually seeing the effects, the detrimental effects that the lockdowns are having. And I believe more and more are coming to that realization that we need to look at this more closely. We need to look at this from the standpoint of, what is it doing to our communities? What is it doing to our families? What is it doing to our own selves, our minds? And that's just wonderful. We must have this conversation before things get much worse, because the way it's going now, we'll be paying for this for a long time.
Who are the type of people that you have run into at these peaceful protests? Because you've got Premier Doug Ford referring to people as a bunch of yahoos. With somebody in that position referring to those people as yahoos, it kind of paints everybody with a pretty negative brush. So in your opinion, as a pastor of the church, when you go to these peaceful protests, who do you meet? What are the types of folks that are coming out?
One of the wonderful things about this is all the people that I do get to meet and talk to. And really, James, they're from all over, from all walks of life. I've been honored to meet other pastors. I've met lawyers, I've met doctors, nurses, I've met politicians, business owners, many business owners, people that actually feel the brunt, feel the actual impacts of this lockdown. Premier Ford is not feeling the impact of the lockdown. And I wish he would be a better leader, because good leaders don't say that about people who have dissenting opinions. These are the people of Ontario are supposed to be his people. He is supposed to be their champion, their leader. Whether you agree with him or not, he is our premier. Mm-hmm. And I wish he wouldn't say those things. And if I was holding a conversation with him, which I would love to someday, but I would tell him, Premier, You need to earn the respect of your people, and they'll respect you.
Got it right here, sir.
Why do you think the mayors, particularly we're in southwest Ontario here, the mayor of Windsor, Drew Dilkins, why do you think that those folks aren't showing up at the protests to say a few words to the other side of the argument? Why do you think that is?
Mm-hmm. Well,
is it optics?
I believe it is, and I wish they would show up. I wish that they would take part in a reasonable conversation. That's what we need to have. We need to have a really serious conversation. What are we doing to our communities? Where is this going? Death rates from year to year throughout the past years compared to last year, they haven't changed much. Is this really what we should be doing? Shutting everything down, and what we've seen, sadly, unfortunately, is a very, very distanced and one-sided approach. And really, what we've seen is an unwillingness to even listen, or to, it's easy to say we're all in this together. I mean, to say those words is something really easy to say, but to actually be part of that suffering and do something about it takes more than a politician. It takes a real leader, and that's what we're lacking. Never would have thought that we would be here at a time like this, where you're ticketed and summoned to court for peacefully assembling.
Think about what you're doing.
In fact, in Alma, when they were issued a ticket or tickets recently, the congregation began singing. It was almost like it was kind of bizarre, but it's really interesting to watch the dynamics of it, because you're just peacefully resisting.
Christ the solid rock I stand, all other ground is sinking sand, all other ground is...
Don't block him.
I'm wondering why the intimidation, why the scare tactic. Is it necessary? Is my community, is Leamington, free of crime? Have we really accomplished it? That there's no crime happening. It's amazing that we would actually be persecuted. It's sad. It's sad, because this is not Canada. This really is not the country that I know.
You have some politicians breaking ranks. Randy Hillier, and now with what's happened with Roman Baber. Do you think there's going to be a shift? Because I feel that a shift will come. The more logic and critical thinking that comes into this scenario that we're in, the pendulum has to swing the other way.
I am very, very happy for every voice that speaks out. And seeing different politicians take a stand, coming out, and actually acting on a ground of principle is a blessing and comforting, and it really shows that there are people, even in position, that are willing to start that important conversation and not just be blind to the dire need that our communities are in. I look for more to take a stand. Sadly, they're being treated awfully by their peers, many of their peers.
It's a big decision for them to make.
It is a big decision, but what a worthy one.
Thomas Jefferson says that if a law is unjust, a man is not only right to disobey it, he is obligated to do so.
I have to speak, and I think that is what is driving me, and that is what has driven others. And we can look at another facet of this, and that is the censorship that's going on. I myself have been the victim of social media censorship for simply speaking what I feel in my heart, speaking what I know to be true, even if they don't agree. I have the right, as a Canadian, as a citizen of this country, to speak whatever I choose to speak.
We must open the churches.
And That in itself is a reason to keep on speaking.
What do you say to those people who applaud censorship for some weird reason? They don't like what someone's saying, so they kind of like laugh or chuckle that people are being silenced. Is that a slippery slope in Canada?
It absolutely is. What many don't realize is that one day someone is going to need to speak up for them, and they're actually going to be the ones in trouble. And they're going to wish they had a voice when that happens. The issues, they you know, whatever the censorship is happening, you know, about right now might not be affecting them. But eventually, we're all going to need someone to speak up. And if it's gone, if our rights are gone, if our freedoms are gone, if we're being silenced as we are, what do we have left? We won't be here forever. Years come and go. Times will change. And there's going to be history written. There's going to be an account kept. Our children, our grandchildren, they're going to keep account. And our words will be immortalized. And it's going to be so important what we said and what we did. And I'm thankful. I too feel that a shift and a change is coming. And I think to some degree it started. You know, you can't deny the devastating effects that the lockdowns are having. Unless you totally cover your eyes, as it appears many in government are doing, sadly, and going on vacation at the same time. St. Bart's and different places like that are convenient places to forget about the plight of your constituents, unfortunately. But that's where we are, and I believe that more doctors, more nurses, more frontline workers are beginning to say, look, something's not right. Sadly, they're being censored, they're being fired, they're being, laid off. But that's the truth. You cannot speak truth and not pay a price. But the price of not speaking truth is so much bigger.
What do you say to the Canadians who are just keeping their head below the parapet, waiting for this to all blow over, and hoping that somebody else takes care of the problem and that they won't have to? Perhaps the ones that have been sitting in the sidelines. What is your message to those Canadians?
My message would be that it may never blow over. It may never end unless we stand up. And I understand there's stigma, there's a lot of things involved. There's different ways the media can paint you and will, and the mainstream media, that is. And being on the stage of we're in the courts of public opinion is quite a place. But it's worth it. And my message would be, speak up for what's right, and support those who are speaking up.
We have the freedom to conscience, freedom of religion, freedom of thought, belief, opinion, expression.
Exercising my rights as a free Canadian.
We're guaranteed the charter right of peaceful assembly, of freedom of conscience, freedom of association. That means I can choose to associate. I can choose to peacefully gather.
The sin of the ages is the sin of silence.
Yeah, fighting for your freedom. Canadians, rise up.
We'd like to thank our guest, Pastor Thomas Tovstiga, the Church of God, here in Wheatley, Ontario, just outside Leamington. And guys, thank you for joining us on our inaugural episode of The Rendezvous, brought to you by The Video Agent. My name's James Green, and hopefully there's a lot for you guys to take away from this video. And we'll see you with our next guest sometime in the not too distant future. Thanks again, guys. Thank you.